He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content and support us at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Cryptid Clues. I am your host, Taylor, and today we're trekking back into the paranormal world. But before we get to that, I just want to shout out our social media channels that you can access. And if you ever want to reach us directly, you can do so via cryptidclues@gmail.com. Now, last week's episode, we took a look at the mysterious appearing and disappearing islands. And I'm just bringing that up because while that was on my trip to Vancouver Island, something else happened that I wanted to highlight, and that's serving as kind of a foundation and inspiration for today's topic. Now, if you've traveled with kids, you might think, okay, nighttime is a great way to go about it. That's what exactly we did. My wife and I, as we were traveling to Vancouver Island, we thought, hey, we're going to do a through the night drive to our destination. So, like I said, it worked great. Kids slept the whole way. We had a nice mix of podcasts and music playing, and it was just it's quite a few hours by car to get to where we're going. So it's a fairly long trek, but it's relaxing. No traffic, a little bit of troubling weather once you get to those higher peaks, but there's hardly any street lights. You're just coasting on the highways. There's not a lot of turns, just ups and downs. It's great. But like I said, there's no street lights at some parts. And when you are a ways away from the nearest town, let's say by at least an hour, 2 hours, it's pitch black. It can get a little bit unsettling. But it was a nice cruise. So when we were basically hitting a certain part of the highway and it's dark, of course, you have a preconceived notion that any one of these turns, and me in particular, after doing this show for this period of time and reading so many things, I have this thought, oh my gosh, something is going to pop around. It's going to be a Bigfoot. It's going to be a dogman. Something unsettling. Now, that was not the case, but what did happen, sure enough, it freaked me out, and it was very, very brief. But I take comfort in the fact that my wife also saw this and could reaffirm what I had seen. Again, to paint the picture, it's dark, no streetlights, no traffic, there's no parked cars or anything, there's not even much room for a car to park on the side of the road on this highway. At this point of the highway, at least, it's just dark. And as we turn the corner, there's a concrete barrier that's running along the right side of the road, basically to help, I think, prevent cars from going over and going into the ditch or off the side of the bank. Now, when we were coasting along this bend, and I had my high beams on, sitting on the concrete barrier on the right side of the road was a person, but they had their back facing the road. Now, they were wearing a parka of sorts. You could tell by the hood being up and it having a lot of fluff around the rim of it. It makes sense because it's very, very cold up there on the highway. This is, 1 to 2 a.m. in the morning, and it's just going to be freezing, little patches of snow up there. And after we had passed this person, it was darkness back there again. So this person is just sitting in the dark, in the middle of the night, early morning, all alone. Is this a real person? Most likely. But why are they all the way out here? Why are they putting themselves in this situation? It's just a lot of whys, and I don't have answers. Now, like I said, the inspiration for this and the segue here is, what if this is paranormal in origin? Many roads and highways all over have stories attached to them of hauntings and ghosts and many other very mysterious ongoings. So what we're going to do is break down a few of them and then touch back on my experience. Now, one of these highways that are very, very haunted can be found in South Africa, R33. Now, this highway is between Greytown and Dundee and stretches roughly through 3 provinces. It's a very long road, and attached to it is a reported spirit of a phantom biker. Now, it's reported that this phantom biker had died on a crash on the road. According to this legend, the biker spirit still rides the road at night, and drivers reportedly have seen him speeding towards them, only to just quickly disappear before he reaches them. Some have also reported feeling chills and just emotions of dread as this biker apparition approaches them. And allegedly, a fatal accident occurred with a motorist here, hence the ghost rider patrolling the roads. But while the story is widely told, there is no concrete evidence of this accident. But that notable spirit aside, cold spots have been frequently reported by those traveling on this highway, along with other mysterious apparitions as well, making it one of the more, at least, proclaimed haunted highways in South Africa. But it's not the only one. There is another haunted road called the N9 National Road. Now, specifically, this stretch between Uniondale and Willowmore. The prominent story attached to this stretch of roadway, though, is that of a hitchhiker by the name of Maria Charlotte Rue. Now, this was a young woman who tragically passed away in a car accident on April 12, 1968. She was a passenger in a vehicle that overturned during stormy weather conditions. Now, come the year 1976, the first reported sighting occurred, with many, many more similar encounters since. People driving along the N9 reported seeing a young woman hitchhiking. So, people, naturally, they would pull over, offer help. This woman would actually get into their vehicle, tell them a destination, which again is reportedly near Uniondale, then suddenly she would vanish. What's interesting here is the striking similarities to Japan, where after the 2011 tsunami had hit, taxi drivers began reporting ghost passengers. These passengers being the unfortunate victims of the devastation. But just like our aforementioned spirit here, they would open the door, they would get into the cab, and they would actually relay, like, I want to go here, and the cab drivers would drive, and all of a sudden, they're gone. I can imagine the believability, though, thinking, you are picking up a hitchhiker, and like I said, the doors are opening and closing. There's some reports that there's exchanges of laughter with this hitchhiker, and then all of a sudden it's just a reported chill of air before they're gone. But to each his own. Lastly, before we switch countries, we're going to touch down on the capital of South Africa, Pretoria, Old Johannesburg Road. This is said to be haunted by the spirits of many soldiers who died in battle during the Anglo-Boer War. Now, this war was a conflict fought between the British Empire and the 2 Boer republics. Note that this is the second Anglo-Boer War, not the first. And this war took place from 1899 to 1902. Now, according to legend, the soldiers still march along the road, frequently enough that drivers have reported hearing the sounds of marching boots and even seeing apparitions of soldiers in their rearview mirrors. Feelings of unease and sadness also accompany drivers passing through this area, but we've covered battlefields before. Many Confederate battlefields that had horrific death tolls which yield prominent paranormal activity. So, in the case of Johannesburg Road, I definitely don't doubt the fact that if it was a heavily used military pathway and there were deaths there, because this is obviously a very, very it's a nasty time for war. You know, you go back a few centuries. I mean, war in general is very, very nasty. But some of those earlier wars were really, really, really bad, and the way they did things, and just people. I'd like to say that we try not to be as expendable with people these days, and maybe that's too bold a claim, but back then I wasn't there, but I feel like expendability for people, it's bad. You could get orders to go somewhere and it could be bad, but it's just that's a conversation for another day. War in itself is it leads to very interesting paranormal outcomes in some of these places, and it makes sense because through war you have people that pass on with unfinished business, people that pass on in states of anger and just powerful emotions. And at least with what I believe, at least I think what I believe, when those emotions are manifested in an area, it generates a powerful form of energy, and that energy could then in turn manifest as a spirit, as a ghost. But of course, do we really have the answers? No. Do I have these answers? No. I can only interpret what I think, and to me that's what makes sense. But it doesn't mean I'm right. I digress. We're going to be heading overseas now towards New Jersey, North America. Here exists a road running north-south called Clinton Road. Beginning at Route 23 near Newfoundland, it runs around 10 miles, 16 kilometers, to the north at Upper Greenwood Lake. Now, the road itself and the surrounding forests have gained a lot of popularity due to its paranormal ongoings, cryptid sightings, and occult activities. Now, trying to look into information on this road was interesting. There are many shows that seem to really commercialize or clickbait, if that's the right way to put it. Doing that with their videos to try and get more people to tune in, I imagine, just with the thumbnails and the titles. Oh, geez. I took a step back and siphoned through some things here because I want to try and accurately, albeit being ghosts and cryptids, accurately deduce and break down things about this road that are cemented in legend and folklore, and just try to pave a path. So let's look at the facts, starting with Cross Castle. Before 1988, it was still possible to find the ruins of this castle, which was along a portion of Clinton Road. Since then, however, the castle has been demolished entirely. With only a few scattered pieces remaining on the grounds, the castle was faced with this destruction due to it being deemed unsafe and a liability by the Newark Watershed Commission. The stone structure had been left in ruins for quite a fair bit of time after a fire broke out. But even after the damage, it became a very popular spot for hikers, teenagers, and vandals. People would come in and they would take bricks off the property and other little pieces of souvenirs. But in 1905, a man named Richard Cross had purchased land along Clinton Road to build this castle for his family. His family included his wife and their 3 children. Now, descriptions of the castle painted as a place straight out of an English Gothic novel. Had 3 stories, masonry, structure, and turrets. Richard Cross lived there for only about 12 years before dying in 1917. His family afterwards had sold the property to the city of Newark in 1919, and it was then, shortly after that transaction, that the fire had broken out and destroyed all the wooden components of the castle, leaving charred stone and concrete in its wake. The old local rumors attached to this site, pre-castle construction though, label the woods themselves as evil. Not the castle itself, but this amount of negative energy the locals reported from the woods was enough to keep many folks from venturing in. After the castle was left abandoned, it is reported that groups of KKK members and Satanists actually used it for gatherings. This is only backed by reports from individuals who would go there at night and would see these things happening. They'd report chants, laughter, and even finding mutilated animal remains. Do I have names or any specific details of these witnesses? No. I just have the reports from witnesses that they submitted online. And I mean, any place that has mutilated animal remains, I'm inclined to think that, okay, there's maybe something going on if you were there and people are chanting and whatnot. That's a big red flag for me. But theories started to sprout out once people ventured into the nearby woods. They actually had found another stone structure. So rumors about a Druidic temple, ancient rituals, these are all things that circulated. And after this temple became more public knowledge and was found by a few more people, the history kind of presented itself, and we could kind of trace things back a little bit, because in reality, the structure was an old furnace. Back in 1826, a man named William Jackson purchased more than 1,000 acres of land at this location for iron processing. 2 nearby ponds and a waterfall provided enough power to run all of this planned sawmill and grist mill construction. The dense forest provided enough charcoal to keep the furnace running properly, and as per the records, William was unable to complete the project and, well, inevitably sold the property off. A couple of times, actually, until it was bought by John Winslow and Freeman Wood, who had partnered up together and completed a blacksmith shop in 1833. The forge operated under the name Clinton Iron Works for about 3 years before it was sold once more, with a new owner operating the furnace sporadically before finally abandoning it in 1852. The property was then annexed into the Pequannock watershed in 1900, which has since been used to supply water to the city of Newark. While the furnace still stands, it's frequently patrolled by Newark Watershed Commission members in efforts to simply discourage any vandals from defacing it. So, with all of that being said, it helps paint a little normalcy into the picture of the castle and the surrounding grounds. While they may not directly be haunted as per the stories, the road itself seems particularly paranormal. Now, the most commonly mentioned ghost tale is that of a little boy, who particularly appears on a dangerous stretch of road known as Dead Man's Curve, which is actually a bridge. This curve turns around 90 degrees and is located over a stream called Mossman's Creek. Now, careless and distracted drivers who, well, unfortunately miss this curve would shoot right down into the reservoir near the bridge, and ultimately this has happened, and it's taken many lives. Now, legends being legends, of course, we don't know the actual real origins, but it goes that a young boy's spirit resides under the bridge. Whether he drowned or was hit by a car, who knows? But if you wait on that bridge and supposedly toss a coin over, a few minutes would pass where people report the coin being tossed back up to them. In addition, those who would lean over the bridge railing on rainy days would report feeling something actually push them down towards the water. These dangerous road conditions resulted in the bridge being replaced in 2016. There is, however, another spirit that reportedly is found here, a ghost truck. Similar to what we mentioned before, drivers would see a black truck surrounded by fog materialize next to them, only to pass their vehicle before disappearing. Others report blinding headlights appearing behind their car before vanishing immediately. Now, we mentioned monsters, and motorists began reporting seeing a creature that resembled a huge dog with short hair, covered sporadically in wounds of a sort with very bright red eyes that had a tendency to dart out in front of their vehicle, causing them to brake immediately, and then this thing would make eye contact with them before running off into the forest. While this is in New Jersey, many folks actually assume it's the New Jersey Devil, which Reuben and I did a deep dive in. One of our first earliest episodes, I would actually say, on the show is when we looked at this cryptid. However, we can't really ignore the dog-like features. Could this be a dog man? The red eyes are certainly befitting of one. And we can also look at the fact that dogman and cars seem to go hand in hand in my own personal observation. Reuben and I together found a striking connection between the two. While sightings on foot are not impossible and definitely occur, most reports always seem to have a dogman engaging with someone either in a vehicle or affiliated with a vehicle, and that includes that eye contact. In one case, a motorist had their high beams on as they were basically steering around a bend, and they blasted their lights onto a dogman. Now, if you have ever stood in the path of high beams, you can't see anything or discern anything in front of you. But in this particular case, and in many others, the dogman was actually looking directly at the driver, regardless of the high beams and being blinded by the light. It knew where to look and stare down at that driver, making the driver feel very unsettled and want to zoom out of there much, much faster. Now, moving on from there, it seems the number 6 has some negativity attached to it. While being 6 and alone all by itself is fine, I have found here highways 66 and 666 in the United States to both have paranormal activity attached to it and many other unsettling things. But of the two, the one that stands out much more, and of course it had to be called this, was Highway 666. Now this crosses 3 states, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah. It's been officially changed to Route 491, which I reckon is a lot better than its former title, but people still refer to it as the Devil's Highway. A big push for this name change had come from when all 3 states were looking to prevent further public hysteria regarding the route being cursed. With local motorists making paranormal claims, it wasn't long before one took off, above the rest, and that was a homicidal truck driver story. Now, most reports are fairly similar. People traveling along Route 666, usually alone and late at night, would be confronted suddenly by a truck. Itself moving at speeds in excess of 100 miles per hour. Now, this truck would approach them at the center of the road, and some claims say the truck itself is actually on fire, but that's not in all the reports, only in some. The situation would result in the drivers actually swerving off of the road, while other scenarios would just yield a crash. But fatality rates aren't high along this road. At least the Utah and Colorado sections, they yielded lower than their respective states' averages for highways, while the fatality rate for the New Mexico section was higher than the state average. This is more likely due to the fact that the road here was aging and not necessarily equipped for the increased flux of travel, both tourism and commercial. Well, this isn't paranormal exactly. It's hand in hand tied with it. Skinwalkers. This is one of the most terrifying things that I've ever looked at and discussed on the show. Along this route, there is Navajo Reservation, which includes tales of skinwalkers residing in the area. Motorists have made reports of seeing things that they can't explain, but, assuming that they are skinwalkers, it's hard to, of course, discern between skinwalkers and paranormal, because there's a fair share of reports with motorists seeming to be something appearing in the back seat as they drive, but then they quickly vanish. Very similar to what we were talking about before. Now, coincidentally, similar to also the fact that we were talking about Japan and where certain spirits would get back into the back of a cab, and that seems to be very similar here. Now, I don't know exactly in terms of skinwalkers what their limitations are, or if doing something like that is within the realm of what they would do, what their MO is. But I digress. Just like the aforementioned Clinton Road, another canine has been spotted along this highway. In the more remote parts, of course, of the highway, witnesses have claimed to see not one, but multiple, and I quote, hellhounds. And these things have supposedly kept pace with vehicles traveling at high speeds. But in closing, I wanted to highlight one more haunted spirit that I felt was worth bringing up in association with this highway, and that is a woman in white. Now, these spirits, whether connected, the same, or all unique and individual in each self, remain to be, for me, one of the most mysterious paranormal phenomena that I have ever looked into, worldwide. A woman in white can have many different interpretations, but it's often looked at as a representation of sorrow, loss, and unresolved business. But every culture has one. And while they represent these things, they're often associated with the tragedy of death, murder, suicide, and betrayal. In the case of Route 666, this woman in white shares similar characteristics to previously mentioned spirits, with one scenario involving a driver that spotted a young woman in the middle of nowhere along this highway, and, of course, in the middle of the night. So, they claim to have pulled off to the side of the road and offered their assistance, but the woman then vanished into thin air. And these are just a few of the haunted highways that I wanted to bring up. You can find lists that detail many, many more, like the M6 motorway, A38 road, Og Road, Platte Lane, Interstate 4. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. That's just to name a few. While some share common similarities, they each present very unique paranormal occurrences. So, what was it really that we saw in our drive to Vancouver Island? An associate of mine works with the federal government in emergency situations, and they actually sent me a posted article of someone being hit by a car in that, I'm not going to say the exact same spot, but within a relatively close proximity, just a few days later. They closed that part of the highway down due to the accident, and unfortunately the person did die at the scene. So what we saw, while maybe it's paranormal, to me, they looked like a very real person sitting next to the highway. But in the event of any ghost counter, I think that's often the catch, is we think these things are real people, when then suddenly the unexpected and impossible happens, like they just disappear, or whatever else that may be. With that, however, our haunted highway episodes is concluded. Now, I think I will return to this topic and cover just a few more mysterious highways, because I feel as though we just scratched the surface on this topic and more light needs to be shed on it. Not just with paranormal either, but cryptids, and especially UFOs, UAPs, all that activity that is affiliated with some of these highways. But I digress. You can find us on your social media channels, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. And should you wish to reach us directly, you can reach us at CryptidClues@gmail.com. We would love to hear your story, or simply just to see you say hello. Until next time, everyone, I am your host, Taylor, and remember, take care and stay safe.